I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen by a man until the Duke of Wentworth stood on the steps of the orphanage, his eyes brimming with tears he refused to let fall, and my daughter offered him the only treasure she possessed. In that single moment, the walls I had built around my heart began to crack, and I knew that nothing in my careful, hidden life would ever be the same again. My name is Eleanor Ashford, though I had not spoken that surname aloud in 5 years. To the children of Hartwell Orphanage, I was simply Miss Ellie, the woman who braided their hair and sang them to sleep when the nights grew too cold and lonely. To the matron, Mrs. Bramwell, I was a quiet, dependable worker who never complained and never asked for more than my small room in the attic and meals shared with my daughter. To the world that had once known me, I was dead, a ghost of a girl who had vanished into the fog of scandal and ruin. But I remembered the silk gowns and the chandeliers, the sound of my father's laughter echoing through our estate before the creditors came. I remembered the promises whispered by a man whose face I had tried so desperately to forget, promises that turned to ash the moment he learned I carried his child. I remembered the night I fled London with nothing but a small valise and the growing swell of my belly, my heart shattered into pieces too small to ever reassemble. And I remembered the morning Iris was born, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, her eyes the color of spring violets, and I swore to her in that moment that I would give her everything I had lost: love, safety, a mother who would never abandon her, no matter how cruel the world became. 5 years had passed since that vow. 5 years of scrubbing floors and mending torn clothing, of teaching letters to children who had never known a gentle touch, of watching my daughter grow into a creature of such pure light that sometimes it hurt to look at her. She had my dark hair and my stubborn chin, but her spirit was entirely her own, untouched by the bitterness that had settled into my bones. She believed in goodness. She believed in miracles. She believed that every person deserved love, even those who had forgotten how to accept it. It was this belief that led her to the Duke on that gray November morning. I had been in the kitchen when the carriage arrived, its black lacquered sides gleaming despite the overcast sky. The horses were magnificent, their coats brushed to a shine that spoke of wealth beyond anything Hartwell had ever seen. Mrs. Bramwell had been in a flutter all week, ever since the letter arrived bearing the Wentworth seal. "A duke," she had whispered to me, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and terror. "A duke wishes to visit our humble establishment. He seeks an heir, Miss Ellie." Can you imagine? I could imagine. I could imagine all too well the cold transaction that such a visit implied. A child plucked from obscurity to serve the purposes of a man who saw them not as a soul, but as a solution. I had known men like that in my former life, men who viewed everything and everyone as pieces on a chessboard, moved and sacrificed according to their will. I had been such a piece once, a pawn in my father's desperate games, a prize to be won and discarded by a man who never loved me. So I stayed in the kitchen, my hands buried in bread dough, my jaw tight with resentment I had no right to feel. Let Mrs. Bramwell fawn over the Duke. Let her parade the children before him like livestock at market. I wanted no part of it. But Iris, my sweet, impossible Iris, had other plans. She had slipped away from the nursery while I was not watching, drawn by the sound of the carriage wheels on gravel. I did not know this until later, until one of the older boys came running into the kitchen, his face pale with fear. "Miss Ellie," he gasped, clutching at my sleeve. "Little Iris is talking to the Duke. She is talking to him on the steps, and Mrs. Bramwell looks like she might faint." My heart stopped. For one terrible moment, all I could see was my daughter in the hands of some cold aristocrat, taken from me the way everything else had been taken. I abandoned the dough and ran, flour still dusting my arms, my cap askew, my breath coming in sharp, painful gasps. I burst through the front doors and stopped. The scene before me was nothing like what I had feared. The Duke of Wentworth stood on the orphanage steps, a tall figure in a dark coat, his shoulders rigid with the posture of a man accustomed to command. But his face, Oh, his face told a different story. He was perhaps 30 years of age, with dark hair swept back from a forehead lined with tension and eyes the color of a winter storm. Those eyes were fixed on my daughter, who stood before him with her small hand extended, her violet gaze earnest and unafraid. And there were tears on his cheeks, not flowing freely, no. He was too proud for that, too armored by whatever pain had driven him to this place. But they glistened at the corners of his eyes, caught in his dark lashes, threatening to fall despite every effort he made to contain them. He looked like a man who had just been struck by something he could not name, something that had reached past every defense he had constructed. Mrs. Bramwell stood to the side, wringing her hands, clearly uncertain whether to intervene or flee. The other children had gathered at the windows, their faces pressed to the glass, watching with the rapt attention of those who recognize a story unfolding before them. And my daughter, my brave, foolish, beautiful daughter, spoke the words that would change everything. "Do not cry, sir," she said, her voice clear as a bell in the cold morning air. "You can borrow my mamma. She is very good at making sadness go away. She sings songs and makes warm bread and never ever lets go when you need holding. You can borrow her until you feel better. I do not mind sharing." The Duke stared at her. I stared at her. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then he dropped to one knee, bringing himself to her level, and his voice when he spoke was rough, as though the words had to fight their way past something broken in his chest. "What is your name, little one?" "Iris," she said proudly, "like the flower. Mama says I am named for hope because iris flowers grow even in the hardest ground." He was silent for a long moment, and I watched something shift in his expression, some wall crumbling that he had perhaps not even known was there. "Your mama sounds like a wise woman," he said finally. "Where is she?" Iris turned and her face lit up when she saw me frozen in the doorway. "There she is," she announced, pointing directly at me. "That is my mama. Is she not beautiful?" Every eye turned to me. Mrs. Bramwell's face went crimson with mortification, no doubt expecting me to be dismissed on the spot for allowing my illegitimate child to accost a duke. But I could not look at Mrs. Bramwell. I could not look at anyone except the man kneeling before my daughter, his storm-gray eyes finding mine across the distance between us. Something passed between us in that moment. I could not name it then, and I am not certain I can name it now, even after everything that followed. It was not love, not yet. It was not even understanding. It was recognition, perhaps. The recognition of one wounded creature for another. The acknowledgement that we were both survivors of something that had left us scarred and wary and desperately alone. He rose to his feet, and I saw how tall he was, how broad his shoulders were beneath the fine wool of his coat. He moved toward me with a measured stride, his face carefully composed now, the tears banished as though they had never existed. "You are this child's mother," he said. It was not a question. I lifted my chin, refusing to cower before him as I had once cowered before men of his station. "I am," I said. "And I apologize if she disturbed you, Your Grace. She is young and does not yet understand the boundaries of propriety." A flicker of something crossed his features. Amusement, perhaps, or surprise at my directness. "She did not disturb me," he said quietly. "She merely offered me something I had not expected to find in such a place." "And what is that, Your Grace?" He studied me for a long moment, his gaze traveling over my flower-dusted arms, my disheveled hair, my face that I knew bore the marks of years of hard work and hidden sorrow. "Kindness," he said at last, "unguarded and genuine kindness. It has been a very long time since anyone offered me such a gift." I did not know what to say. I had expected coldness, condescension, the dismissive cruelty I had come to associate with men of power. Instead, I found myself looking into eyes that held a grief so profound it made my own losses feel small by comparison. Mrs. Bramwell chose that moment to bustle forward, her voice high and nervous as she attempted to smooth over what she clearly perceived as a disaster. "Your Grace, please forgive the interruption. Miss Ashford is one of our workers, and her daughter is not among the children we had selected for your consideration. If you would allow me to show you the others, the ones we discussed in my correspondence, I am certain you will find a suitable candidate for your household." The Duke's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I did not come here to shop for a child, Mrs. Bramwell. I came because my family demands an heir, and I have no intention of providing one through conventional means. But I find myself questioning the wisdom of this entire venture." His gaze returned to Iris, who had taken my hand and was watching him with undimmed curiosity. "This child," he said slowly, "she is not an orphan." "No, Your Grace," Mrs. Bramwell confirmed quickly. "Miss Ashford came to us 5 years ago seeking employment, and we allowed her to keep her daughter with her as part of her arrangement. The child is not available for adoption." "I see." He was quiet for a long moment, and I tightened my grip on Iris's hand, suddenly afraid of what he might say next. Men like him could destroy lives with a single word. They could take children from their mothers and call it charity. They could expose secrets and watch families crumble for their own amusement. But the Duke of Wentworth did none of these things. "I would like to see the rest of the orphanage," he said finally, his tone brisk and businesslike once more. "And I would like Miss Ashford to accompany us on the tour. She clearly has a rapport with the children that Mrs. Bramwell, despite her many qualities, may lack." Mrs. Bramwell sputtered. "Your Grace, I hardly think that is appropriate. Miss Ashford is merely a worker here, not someone of standing who should be entertaining a man of your position." Mrs. Bramwell. The single utterance of her name silenced her completely. "I have expressed my wishes. I trust you will honor them." And so I found myself walking the halls of Hartwell Orphanage beside the Duke of Wentworth, my daughter skipping ahead of us, my heart beating so loudly I was certain he could hear it. We visited the nursery, where the youngest children slept in rows of small cots, their faces peaceful in the morning light. We visited the schoolroom, where the older children practiced their letters under the supervision of a harried teacher. We visited the dining hall, the kitchens, the small chapel where services were held each Sunday. And throughout it all, the Duke asked questions. Not the questions I expected about ages and temperaments and which children would be most suitable for a noble household. He asked about their health, about their education, about what happened to them when they turned 16 and were released into a world that had no place for them. He asked about the funding for the orphanage, the state of the building, the quality of the food. He asked me questions, too. Where had I learned to read and write so well? How had I come to work at Hartwell? What did I dream of for my daughter's future? I answered carefully, revealing only what was safe, hiding everything that could expose the truth of my former life. But even as I spoke, I sensed that he saw through my evasions. There was an intelligence in his gaze that missed nothing, a perception that made me feel both seen and vulnerable. By the time the tour concluded, nearly 2 hours had passed. Mrs. Bramwell was exhausted, her face flushed with the effort of maintaining her composure in the presence of such an illustrious guest. Iris had grown bored and wandered off to play with the other children, and I stood in the entrance hall, uncertain of what to do next. The Duke turned to Mrs. Bramwell. "I will need time to consider my decision," he said. "I will send word within the week. In the meantime, I would like to make a donation to the orphanage for improvements to the children's living quarters. My solicitor will be in contact with the details." Mrs. Bramwell nearly collapsed with gratitude. "Your Grace, that is most generous. We are deeply honored by your consideration and your kindness." He nodded, already turning toward the door. Then he paused and looked back at me. "Miss Ashford, walk with me to my carriage." It was not a request. I glanced at Mrs. Bramwell, who gave me a frantic nod, and followed him out into the cold November air. We walked in silence down the gravel path, the crunch of our footsteps the only sound in the still morning. His carriage waited at the gate, the horses stamping impatiently, the coachman sitting rigid on his perch. When we reached the carriage, the Duke stopped and faced me. "You are not what you seem," he said quietly. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace. You speak like a woman of education. You carry yourself like one born to privilege. Yet you work in an orphanage and hide your surname behind a common name. You have a child, but no husband and no ring. You looked at me today not with the deference of a servant, but with the wariness of an equal who has been wounded by those of my station." My throat tightened. "I have done nothing wrong, Your Grace. I did not say you had." He studied me with those storm-colored eyes, and I felt as though he could see straight into the heart of me. "I merely observe that you are a mystery, Miss Ashford, and I find myself intrigued by mysteries." "I am no mystery," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I am simply a woman trying to provide for her child. Whatever you imagine you see in me, I assure you it is nothing of interest to a man of your position." A faint smile touched his lips, the first I had seen from him all day. "That," he said, "is precisely what makes you interesting." He climbed into the carriage without another word, and I watched as it rolled away down the lane, disappearing into the gray mist that hung over the countryside. I told myself it meant nothing. I told myself he would choose some suitable orphan for his heir, and I would never see him again. I told myself that the flutter in my chest was merely anxiety, nothing more. But even then, I knew I was lying. The Duke's letter arrived 3 days later, addressed not to Mrs. Bramwell, but to me. I held the envelope in trembling hands, staring at the elegant script, the crimson wax seal bearing the Wentworth crest. Mrs. Bramwell hovered nearby, her face pale with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "Well," she demanded, "open it. What does His Grace want?" I broke the seal and unfolded the heavy paper. The message was brief, written in a bold, decisive hand. "Miss Ashford, I have given considerable thought to my visit to Hartwell Orphanage and have reached a decision regarding my search for an heir. I find that I am unable to proceed without first understanding the full truth of your circumstances. I believe you are hiding something, not out of malice, but out of necessity. I offer you this. Come to Wentworth Manor this Saturday for tea. Tell me your story, and I give you my word as a gentleman that whatever you reveal will remain in strictest confidence. If you choose not to come, I will not pursue the matter further, and our paths need never cross again. The choice is yours. Wentworth." I read the letter 3 times before the words fully registered. Mrs. Bramwell was nearly beside herself with impatience. "What does it say? Has he chosen a child? Does he mention the donation?" I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my apron pocket. "He wishes to meet with me again," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "At his estate. This Saturday." Her eyes went wide. "You? But why? What could he possibly want with you?" "I do not know," I lied, "but I intend to find out." The days that followed were a torment of indecision. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter entirely, to continue my quiet life at Hartwell and pretend the Duke of Wentworth had never entered it. That part whispered warnings of danger, of exposure, of all the terrible things that could happen if a man of his power learned the truth of who I was. But another part, a part I had thought long dead, stirred with something that felt almost like hope. He had looked at me not with contempt, but with curiosity. He had spoken to me not as a servant, but as a person worthy of conversation. He had wept on the orphanage steps, this cold and powerful man, and my daughter had reached him when no one else could. Perhaps, that treacherous part of me whispered, perhaps not all men of his kind are the same. Perhaps there is still goodness to be found in the world you fled. On Saturday morning, I dressed in my best gown, a simple gray dress that had once belonged to a woman of means before it found its way to a charity bin. I brushed my hair until it shone and pinned it up in a style I had not worn since my days as the daughter of an earl. I kissed Iris goodbye, leaving her in the care of one of the older orphan girls who adored her, and I walked the 3 miles to Wentworth Manor. The estate was everything I had imagined and more. Grand iron gates opened onto a sweeping drive lined with ancient oaks, their bare branches reaching toward a sky the color of pewter. The manor itself rose from the landscape like something out of a dream, its stone walls softened by centuries of ivy, its windows glinting in the weak winter light. I had grown up in a house of similar grandeur, but Wentworth Manor possessed a gravity, a sense of history and weight that my childhood home had lacked. A footman met me at the door and led me through halls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, past rooms filled with furniture that cost more than I would earn in a lifetime. I kept my eyes forward, my spine straight, refusing to be intimidated by the opulence surrounding me. The Duke received me in his study, a warm room lined with books, a fire crackling in the hearth. He rose when I entered, and I was struck again by how handsome he was, how the severity of his features was softened by the firelight. "Miss Ashford," he said, "thank you for coming. Please sit." He gestured to a chair near the fire, and I lowered myself into it, my hands folded tightly in my lap to hide their trembling. "You said you wanted to know my story," I said, deciding that directness was my only weapon against a man who clearly valued honesty. But first, I must understand why. What possible interest could a duke have in the life of an orphanage worker? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the window and gazed out at the gray gardens beyond. "When I was 23 years old," he said quietly, "I was engaged to be married. Her name was Catherine. We had known each other since childhood, and I believed, truly believed, that our life together would be one of happiness and purpose. 3 days before our wedding, she contracted a fever. Within a week, she was dead. I drew in a sharp breath. "Your Grace, I am so sorry." He turned to face me, and his expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the shadow of old grief lurking in his eyes. After Catherine died, I swore I would never love again. I would never marry, never have children of my own blood, never allow another person close enough to wound me as her loss had wounded me. My mother has spent the past 7 years trying to change my mind, parading eligible young women before me, reminding me of my duty to the family name. I have resisted every attempt, and then she suggested the orphanage. He moved to the chair across from mine and sat down, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze intent upon my face. I went to Hartwell expecting to feel nothing. I expected to choose some suitable child based on practical considerations and leave without a backward glance. Instead, I found your daughter standing on the steps, offering me her mother as though kindness were the most natural thing in the world. And I found you, a woman whose eyes held a pain I recognized, whose bearing spoke of a life far different from the one she now leads. He leaned forward slightly. "I am not interested in your story because I wish to expose you or use it against you. I am interested because for the first time in 7 years, I find myself wanting to understand another person, and that terrifies me more than you can possibly know." The silence that followed his words was heavy, charged with an emotion I could not name. I looked into his gray eyes and saw not a cold aristocrat, but a man as broken as I was, searching for something he had lost hope of finding. And so I told him. I told him about my father, the Earl of Ashford, whose gambling debts had consumed our fortune piece by piece until nothing remained but shame and ruin. I told him about the man I had loved, a charming second son who had courted me with poetry and promises, who had taken my virtue and vanished the moment he learned of the consequences. I told him about my father's death, about the creditors who stripped our home of everything valuable, about the night I fled London with my shame hidden beneath a loose gown and my heart turned to stone. I told him about Iris, about the agony of giving birth alone in a charity hospital, about the fierce and overwhelming love that had flooded me the moment I held her in my arms. I told him about the years at Hartwell, about the small joys and the quiet sorrows, about the way I had learned to find contentment in a life I had never imagined for myself. When I finished, the fire had burned low, and the shadows had lengthened across the floor. The Duke had not moved, had not spoken, had not taken his eyes from my face. "You have been alone for 5 years," he said finally, "carrying all of this with no one to share the burden." "I have Iris," I said, my voice thick with emotion I could not suppress. "She is enough. She has always been enough." He reached out then, and for a moment I thought he would touch me, but his hand stopped just short of mine, hovering in the space between us like a question he could not bring himself to ask. "You deserve more than enough. Miss Ashford," he said softly, "you deserve the world." I did not know what to say. I did not know what to feel. So I simply sat there, my heart pounding, my eyes stinging with tears I refused to shed, while the Duke of Wentworth looked at me as though I were something precious and unexpected, a treasure he had stumbled upon in the most unlikely of places. That was the first of many visits. Over the weeks that followed, the Duke found reasons to come to Hartwell again and again. He brought donations of blankets and books and food for the children. He arranged for a doctor to visit and tend to those who were ill. He funded repairs to the aging building, ensuring that the orphans would have warmth and safety through the coming winter. And always, he found time to speak with me. We talked of everything and nothing. Books we had read, places we had dreamed of visiting, memories of childhood that still made us smile. He told me about his years at Oxford, about his travels through Europe before Catherine's death, about the crushing weight of responsibility that had descended upon him when his father died, and he inherited the dukedom at the age of 25. I told him about my mother, who had died when I was 12, about the governess who had taught me to love poetry, about the garden at my childhood home where I had spent hours reading beneath a willow tree. We did not speak of love. We did not speak of the future. We existed in a fragile present, two wounded souls circling each other with a caution born of too much pain. But I could not deny what was growing between us. Every time he looked at me, I felt it. Every time his hand brushed mine in passing, I felt it. Every time he laughed at something Iris said, that rare and beautiful sound, I felt it like a flame kindling in my chest, warming places that had been cold for far too long. Iris adored him. She had claimed him as her own that first day on the orphanage steps, and she saw no reason to relinquish her claim. She called him Duke Alexander, despite my attempts to teach her proper forms of address, and he permitted the familiarity with an indulgence that surprised everyone who knew him. "She is remarkable," he told me one afternoon as we watched her play with the other children in the orphanage courtyard. "She has your spirit. She has more courage than I ever did," I replied. "She is not afraid of anything." He turned to look at me, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps she learned that from you. Perhaps she sees the courage you do not recognize in yourself." I shook my head. "I am not courageous, Your Grace. I am merely stubborn." He smiled, and my heart stuttered in my chest. "Stubbornness and courage often look remarkably similar, Miss Ashford. The difference lies only in the direction one faces when refusing to yield." As the weeks became months, I began to allow myself to hope. Dangerous, foolish hope that I knew I should crush before it could take root. But it grew anyway, nurtured by every glance, every word, every moment of connection that passed between us. And then his mother came. The Dowager Duchess of Wentworth arrived at Hartwell on a bitter February morning, her carriage gleaming black against the snow that had fallen overnight. I was in the laundry room when the news reached me, and I felt my blood turn to ice. I had heard stories of the Dowager, whispered among the servants at the manor when I visited. She was a woman of iron will and fierce pride, devoted to the Wentworth name above all else. She had never forgiven her son for refusing to marry after Catherine's death, and she had made it her mission to see him produce an heir by any means necessary. I knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in my stomach, that she had come to end whatever had begun between her son and me. Mrs. Bramwell came to find me, her face gray with anxiety. "The Dowager Duchess wishes to speak with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the parlor. Alone." I smoothed my apron, straightened my cap, and walked to meet my fate. She was standing by the window when I entered, a tall woman with silver hair and the same storm-gray eyes as her son. But where his eyes held hidden warmth, hers were chips of ice, cold and assessing. "You are Miss Ashford," she said. It was not a question. "I am, Your Grace." "Close the door." I did as she commanded, my heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm of dread. She turned to face me fully, and I saw in her expression everything I had feared: contempt, calculation, the absolute certainty of a woman who had never been denied anything she wanted. "My son has spoken of you," she said, at length, with an enthusiasm he has not shown for anything since Catherine died. I said nothing. There was nothing I could say. "I have made inquiries," she continued, her voice as cold as the winter wind outside. "I know who you are, Eleanor Ashford, daughter of the disgraced Earl of Ashford, mother of a bastard child, a fallen woman masquerading as a servant." The words struck like physical blows, but I refused to flinch. "I have never hidden what I am, Your Grace." "No," she agreed. "You have merely hidden who you were. A clever distinction, but one that will not save you. My son is the Duke of Wentworth. He cannot associate with a woman of your history. He certainly cannot consider any sort of attachment to one so far beneath him." I lifted my chin, meeting her icy gaze with all the dignity I could muster. "I have encouraged nothing, Your Grace. I have made no claims on your son. If he has formed an attachment, it was not by my design." Her smile was thin and sharp as a blade. "You expect me to believe that a penniless woman with a child to support has not schemed to entrap a wealthy duke? You must think me a fool." "I think," I said quietly, "that you are a mother who loves her son and fears for his happiness. But you are wrong about me. I have no desire to entrap anyone. I would rather spend my life in obscurity than be the cause of your son's ruin." Something flickered in her eyes, a momentary uncertainty that vanished almost before I could register it. "Pretty words," she said, "but words are cheap, actions are what matter. And I am here to ensure that you take the appropriate action. Which is? You will leave Hartwell. You will go somewhere far from here, somewhere my son will never find you. And you will never contact him again. In exchange, I will provide you with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your days. Your daughter will want for nothing." The offer hung in the air between us, a devil's bargain wrapped in silk and silver. I thought of Iris. I thought of the life I could give her with the dowager's money, the education, the opportunities, the chance to grow up without the stain of her mother's shame. I thought of how easy it would be to say yes, to take the coward's path and disappear into some quiet corner of the world. And then I thought of Alexander, the way he laughed when Iris told him stories, the way he looked at me as though I were something precious, the way his hand had hovered over mine that first day in his study, wanting but not daring to touch. "No," I said. The dowager's eyes widened. "I beg your pardon?" "No," I repeated, and my voice was steady now, strengthened by a conviction I had not known I possessed. "I will not take your money. I will not leave. I have done nothing wrong, Your Grace. I have not pursued your son or encouraged his attentions, but I will not run from him either. If he chooses to walk away from me, that is his right. But I will not make that choice for him, not for all the money in England." For a long moment, she simply stared at me. Then, slowly, something shifted in her expression. The contempt faded, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Miss Ashford." "Perhaps both," I replied. "I have been called worse." She studied me a moment longer. then swept toward the door. "This is not over," she said as she passed me. "My son may be enchanted by you now, but enchantments fade. When he comes to his senses, he will see you for what you are." "And what is that, Your Grace?" She paused, her hand on the door handle. "A mistake," she said. "One he will eventually regret." Then she was gone, and I was alone with the silence and the snow falling softly outside the window. I expected Alexander to disappear after his mother's visit. I expected letters to stop, visits to cease, the tentative connection between us to wither and die. It was, after all, what I had experienced before. Men of his world did not defy their mothers for women like me, but Alexander did not disappear. He arrived at Hartwell the very next day, his face grim with an anger I had never seen in him before. He strode into the orphanage without ceremony, found me in the kitchen where I was teaching Iris to knead bread, and stopped in the doorway, breathing hard as though he had run the entire way from the manor. "My mother came to see you," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." "What did she say to you?" I set aside the dough and wiped my hands on my apron, conscious of Iris watching us with wide, curious eyes. "Iris, darling," I said gently, "why don't you go find Sarah and show her the new bread shapes we learned?" My daughter looked between us, clearly reluctant to leave, but my expression must have conveyed the seriousness of the moment. She nodded solemnly and slipped out of the kitchen, leaving Alexander and me alone. "She offered me money to leave," I said once Iris was gone, "to go somewhere far away and never see you again." His jaw tightened. "And what did you say?" I said no. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly, but his eyes remained troubled. "Eleanor," he said, and the sound of my Christian name on his lips made my heart stutter. "I must apologize for my mother. She had no right to speak to you that way, no right to threaten you or try to drive you away." "She is your mother," I said carefully. "She wants what is best for you. And perhaps she is not wrong. Perhaps I am a complication you do not need." He crossed the kitchen in 3 long strides and stopped before me, close enough that I could see the pulse beating in his throat. "You are not a complication," he said fiercely. "You are the first person in 7 years who has made me want to live again. The first person who has made me believe that perhaps there is something worth hoping for after all." "Alexander," I whispered. "I know I am not what you deserve," he continued, the words tumbling out as though he had been holding them back for weeks. "I am cold and broken and so afraid of losing someone again that I have spent years pushing everyone away. But you, Eleanor, you and your daughter, you have broken through every wall I built, and I am tired of fighting it. I am tired of pretending I do not feel what I feel." "What do you feel?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He reached up and cupped my face in his hands, his touch so gentle it brought tears to my eyes. "I feel hope," he said. "For the first time since Catherine died, I feel hope. And I feel something else, something I never thought I would feel again." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against mine, his breath warm on my lips. "I love you, Eleanor Ashford. I love your strength and your stubbornness and your courage. I love the way you sing to the children and the way you look at your daughter and the way you refuse to bow to anyone, even a dowager duchess who has terrorized half the aristocracy. I love you, and I am done pretending otherwise." The tears spilled over then, tracing warm paths down my cheeks. "I love you too," I whispered. "God help me. I love you too." And then he kissed me. It was not the kiss of a cold and broken man. It was a kiss of awakening, of renewal, of 2 souls finding each other after years of wandering in darkness. His lips were soft and warm, his hands gentle on my face, and I melted into him with a surrender I had never allowed myself before. When we finally pulled apart, both of us trembling, he looked at me with such tenderness that my heart ached. "Marry me," he said. "Alexander, your mother's society," I began. "I do not care about society," he interrupted. "I do not care what anyone thinks. I care about you. I care about Iris. I care about building a life with the woman I love, whatever the cost." "But I am ruined," I said, the old shame rising in my throat. "I have a child born out of wedlock. Your reputation will suffer. Your family will never accept me." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "My reputation is that of a cold, reclusive duke who has refused to marry for 7 years. Any change to that reputation can only be an improvement. As for my family, my mother will learn to accept what she cannot change. She has no other children, no other heirs. Eventually, she will see that her only path to grandchildren is through acceptance." He took my hands in his gray eyes serious once more. "I will not pretend it will be easy," he said. "There will be whispers. There will be scandal. But I have money enough to weather any storm, and more importantly, I have you. With you beside me, Eleanor, I believe I can face anything." "And Iris?" I asked, the question that mattered most of all. His expression softened infinitely. "I fell in love with her first," he admitted. "That day on the steps, when she offered me her mother with such innocent generosity, she captured my heart before I even knew it was possible. I would be honored to be her father, if she will have me. If you will have me." I looked at this man, this proud and wounded duke who had somehow found his way to a crumbling orphanage and discovered love in the most unlikely of places. I thought of all the reasons to say no, all the obstacles that lay before us, all the pain that might await us on the other side of this moment. And then I thought of Iris's words on that gray November morning. "You can borrow my mama." Perhaps she had known, even then, that he would not be borrowing at all. Perhaps she had known that he would become ours, as surely as we would become his. "Yes," I said, the word carrying all the hope and fear and love that I had kept locked away for so long. "Yes, Alexander, I will marry you." The months that followed were both the happiest and most difficult of my life. Word of the Duke of Wentworth's engagement to an orphanage worker spread through society like wildfire. I became the subject of gossip in every drawing room in London, my past dissected and discussed by people who had never met me and never would. Some called me a fortune hunter, a schemer who had seduced a grieving man. Others called me a romantic heroine, a woman who had risen from the ashes of disgrace to capture the heart of a duke. I cared for none of their opinions. I cared only for Alexander, for Iris, for the future we were building together. The Dowager Duchess remained a formidable obstacle. She refused to acknowledge me, refused to attend any event where I might be present, refused to speak her son's name in anything but tones of bitter disappointment. Alexander bore her rejection with a patience I could not have mustered, visiting her weekly despite her coldness, speaking to her of our wedding plans despite her refusal to listen. "She will come around," he told me one evening as we sat together in his study at Wentworth Manor. "She has no choice. Eventually, she will realize that her only options are to accept you or to lose me entirely." "I do not want to be the reason you lose your mother," I said. He reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "You are not the reason," he said. "Her stubbornness is the reason. Her pride is the reason. I will not abandon her, Eleanor, but neither will I sacrifice our happiness to appease her prejudices. She will have to choose what matters more, her pride or her son." The wedding was set for June, when the gardens at Wentworth Manor would be in full bloom. I spent my days at the orphanage, unwilling to leave until I had found and trained a suitable replacement for myself, and my evenings at the manor, learning the rhythms of my new home and allowing Iris to explore its endless rooms and gardens. She flourished in those months, my little girl. She had never known luxury, never experienced the kind of abundance that Wentworth Manor offered. But she accepted it all with the same open-hearted wonder she brought to everything. She loved the horses in the stables, the peacocks that strutted across the lawns, the enormous library where she could spend hours poring over picture books. And she loved Alexander. He had become, in every way that mattered, her father. He taught her to ride a pony, holding the reins while she laughed with delight. He read to her every night, giving voices to the characters in her favorite stories. He chased her through the gardens, allowing her to catch him, falling dramatically to the grass while she climbed on top of him in triumph. Watching them together, I often found myself overwhelmed by emotions I could not name. Joy, certainly. Gratitude. But also a kind of wonder that life could change so completely, that happiness could emerge from such profound sorrow. A week before the wedding, the Dowager Duchess requested an audience with me. I went to her apartments at the Dower House with trepidation, expecting more recriminations, more attempts to drive me away. But when I entered her sitting room, I found a woman who looked older than she had in February, her silver hair more gray, her proud shoulders slightly bowed. "Sit down, Miss Ashford," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her own. I sat. She was silent for a long moment, studying me with those cold gray eyes. Then, slowly, she spoke. "I have spent the past 4 months trying to understand my son's choice. I have examined it from every angle, searched for explanations that would make sense within the world I have always known. I have found none." "Your Grace," I began. "Let me finish," she interrupted, though her voice lacked its former sharpness. "I do not understand his choice, but I have come to accept that I do not need to understand it. My son is happier than I have seen him since Catherine died." He laughs again. He speaks of the future with hope rather than dread. He looks at your daughter as though she hung the moon and stars. She paused, and I saw something I had never expected to see in her face: vulnerability. "I lost my husband 12 years ago," she said quietly. "I know what it is to grieve. I know what it is to believe that happiness has ended forever. I watched my son disappear into that same darkness after Catherine, and I truly thought, that he would never emerge. I thought he would live out his days as a ghost, going through the motions of existence without ever truly living." She met my eyes, and her gaze was no longer cold, but something closer to pleading. "You brought him back," she said. "You and your daughter somehow brought him back from wherever he had gone. I do not know how. I do not pretend to understand it. But I know what I have seen. And I cannot continue to fight against something that has given me back my son." "Your Grace," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I never wanted to come between you and Alexander. I never wanted to cause pain to your family. I only wanted to love him, and to be loved in return." She nodded slowly. "I know that now. It took me far too long to see it, but I know it now." She reached into the pocket of her gown and withdrew something small and glittering. This belonged to my mother, and to her mother before her. It has been passed down through the Wentworth women for 5 generations. She held out her hand, and I saw that she was offering me a ring, a delicate band of gold set with sapphires and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. "It should go to Alexander's wife," she said. "To you." I stared at the ring, unable to speak. "I am not saying I will be an easy mother-in-law," she continued, a hint of her former tartness creeping into her voice. "I am set in my ways, and I do not change easily. But I am trying to say that I accept you, that I welcome you into this family, that I will try, truly try, to love you as a daughter." The tears came then, and I did not try to stop them. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you, Your Grace." She rose and crossed to where I sat, and to my utter astonishment she bent and pressed a kiss to my forehead. "Call me mother," she said gruffly. If we are to be family, we might as well begin as we mean to go on. The wedding was everything I had never dared to dream of. The gardens of Wentworth Manor blazed with June roses, their perfume filling the air as I walked down the aisle on the arm of a distant cousin who had agreed to give me away. The guests, a small gathering of Alexander's closest friends and the staff from Hartwell Orphanage, watched with smiles and tears as I made my way toward the man who waited for me beneath an arbor of white flowers. He was beautiful in his wedding clothes, my Duke. His dark hair gleamed in the sunlight, his gray eyes bright with an emotion that took my breath away. When I reached him, he took my hands in his, and I felt the trembling in his fingers that matched the trembling in my own. Iris stood beside us, dressed in a gown of white lace, a basket of rose petals clutched in her small hands. She had taken her role as flower girl with tremendous seriousness, and her face glowed with pride as she watched her mother marry the man she had chosen for us on that cold November morning. The ceremony was simple and sincere. We spoke our vows beneath the summer sky, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever trials might come. When Alexander slipped the ring onto my finger, the Wentworth ring that his mother had given me, I felt the weight of generations settling around me, welcoming me into a legacy I had never expected to join. And when the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, when Alexander kissed me with a tenderness that made my heart soar, I heard Iris's voice rising above the polite applause of the guests. "I knew you would keep him, Mama," she called out, her words carrying across the garden. I knew he was ours. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Alexander pulled back from our kiss to look down at our daughter with so much love in his eyes that I thought my heart might burst. "She is right," he said, his voice low and meant only for me. "I am yours, now and forever." The years that followed were filled with more happiness than I had ever thought possible. We settled into life at Wentworth Manor, the three of us, and soon enough, more. Our first son was born a year after our wedding, a dark-haired boy with his father's gray eyes, whom we named James after Alexander's father. Our second child, a daughter, arrived 2 years later, a golden-haired sprite we called Rose for the gardens, where Alexander had proposed to me properly, down on one knee with tears in his eyes, the week after I accepted his first impulsive proposal in the orphanage kitchen. Iris grew into a remarkable young woman, sharp and kind and fiercely protective of her younger siblings. Alexander legally adopted her the day after our wedding, giving her his name and his protection, ensuring that she would never be called illegitimate again. She called him Papa from the first day, and he called her his eldest, his first daughter, the one who had saved him when he did not know he needed saving. The Dowager Duchess, true to her word, made a genuine effort to accept our family. She was never warm or demonstrative, but she was present, attending birthdays and holidays, bouncing her grandchildren on her knee with a stiff sort of fondness that gradually softened over the years. When she died, peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, she left her jewelry to me and her library to Iris with a note that said simply, "You were right. Love matters more than pride." I wept when I read those words. I wept for the woman she had been and the woman she had become, for the bridge we had built between us through years of patience and stubborn hope. Hartwell Orphanage remained close to my heart throughout my life. Alexander funded its transformation into a proper school, with trained teachers and modern facilities and opportunities for every child who passed through its doors. I visited often, bringing my children with me so they would understand the life their mother had once lived, the life that had brought us all together. And always, always, I remembered the day it began. A gray November morning, a man weeping on the steps, a little girl offering the only comfort she knew. "You can borrow my mama." Those 5 words had changed everything. They had broken through walls built of grief and fear. They had connected 2 wounded souls who had lost hope of ever healing. They had created a family from fragments, a future from ruins, a love story from sorrow. Sometimes, late at night, I would walk through the halls of Wentworth Manor and marvel at how far I had come. From a fallen earl's daughter to a duchess. From a woman who believed she would never be loved to a woman surrounded by love on every side. From loneliness and shame to a life so full of joy that sometimes I could not believe it was real. On those nights, Alexander would often find me wandering and take my hand without a word, leading me back to our chambers where he would hold me until the wonder faded and I could sleep. "What are you thinking about?" he asked me once during such a night. I smiled against his chest. "I am thinking about the day we met," I said. "I am thinking about Iris on those steps, telling you not to cry." He was silent for a moment, his hand stroking my hair. "She saw something in me that day," he said finally, "something I had buried so deep I had forgotten it existed. She saw that I was capable of love. She saw that I needed it. She saw that we belonged to each other," I agreed, "even before either of us knew it." He tightened his arms around me. "I am grateful every day for her wisdom," he murmured, "and for yours. For taking a chance on a broken man who had nothing to offer but a wounded heart." I lifted my head to look at him, this man who had become my home. "You offered me everything," I told him. "You offered me love when I had given up on it. You offered Iris a father when she had never known one. You offered me a life I never dared to imagine." His gray eyes, so cold when I had first seen them, were warm now, soft with an emotion that still made my breath catch even after all our years together. "And you," he said, "offered me hope. That day in my study, when you told me your story, when you refused to run from me or from my mother, you offered me hope that perhaps the world was not as dark as I believed. You offered me a reason to live again, Eleanor, a reason to love again." He kissed me then, soft and slow, a kiss that carried the weight of all our years together and the promise of all the years to come. When we finally parted, I settled back against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," I whispered. "And I love you," he replied, "always and forever." Outside our window, the night was quiet and still. The moon cast silver light across the gardens where our children played, the lawns where Iris had taken her first steps as our daughter, the steps where a little girl had once changed our lives with 5 simple words. I closed my eyes and let sleep claim me, wrapped in the arms of the man I loved, surrounded by the family we had built together. It had not been the life I expected. It had not been the life anyone expected. But it was ours, and it was beautiful. I think sometimes about what might have happened if Iris had not wandered out to those steps on that cold November morning. I think about the life Alexander might have lived, cold and alone in his grand house, going through the motions of existence without ever truly living. I think about the life I might have lived, growing old in the orphanage, watching my daughter from afar as she made her way in a world that had no place for women like us. I think about all the small choices and chances that brought us together, the fragile threads of fate that wove our stories into one. And I am grateful for every moment of pain that led me to that place, grateful for every loss that prepared me to recognize love when it finally found me. Grateful most of all for my daughter, my Iris, who saw past the walls that both Alexander and I had built and found the hearts waiting behind them. She is married now herself to a good man who adores her, and she has children of her own who call Alexander and me Grandmama and Grandpapa. When I watch her with her family, I see echoes of that little girl on the orphanage steps, the one who believed so firmly in kindness and love and the power of sharing. She learned those things from you, Alexander tells me when he catches me watching her. You taught her to be brave and generous and full of hope. Perhaps I did. But she taught me something too. She taught me that love is not something to be hoarded or hidden, but something to be offered freely, even to strangers weeping on orphanage steps. She taught me that family is not defined by blood or circumstance, but by the choices we make and the hearts we open. She taught me that sometimes the best way to heal a broken heart is to borrow someone else's love until you remember how to find your own. I am old now. My hair has gone silver, like the dowager's was when I first met her, and my hands shake when I pour my tea. Alexander's steps have slowed, and he walks with a cane through the gardens where he once chased our children. But when he looks at me, his eyes are still the same, gray as storm clouds, warm as summer rain, full of a love that has only deepened with the passing years. We sit together in the evenings, in the study where he first kissed me, and we remember. We remember the pain that brought us together and the joy that kept us there. We remember our children as babies, as young people, as the adults they have become. We remember the dowager's grudging acceptance, Mrs. Bramwell's tearful farewell when I left Hartwell, the faces of all the children we helped over the years. And always, always, we remember that gray November morning. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked him once. "Marrying a woman so far beneath your station? Facing all those years of whispers and scandal?" He took my hand in his grip still strong despite the years. "The only thing I regret," he said, "is the years I spent alone before I found you. Every whisper, every scandal, every moment of difficulty was worth it for a single day of loving you." Tears stung my eyes. "Alexander." He smiled, the same smile that had captured my heart all those years ago. "Do you know what I think about most?" he asked, "when I lie awake at night and count my blessings?" "What?" "I think about Iris on those steps. I think about her little hand reaching out to me, her voice telling me not to cry. I think about how she saw past everything, the title, the wealth, the grief, and found the man underneath, a man who desperately needed exactly what she offered." "What did she offer you?" I asked, though I knew the answer. He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Hope," he said. "She offered me hope. And then she led me to you, and you gave me something even better." "What?" His gray eyes held mine, full of all the love we had built together over a lifetime. "A home," he said simply. "A family, a reason to live." I leaned forward and kissed him, soft and slow, a kiss that held the memory of all our kisses and the promise of all the ones to come. When I pulled back, I was smiling through my tears. "I love you, Alexander Blackwood," I said. "I have loved you since the moment you knelt before my daughter and asked her name. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Eleanor Blackwood," he replied, "the woman who gave me back my heart." Outside our window, the sun was setting over Wentworth Manor, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. In the gardens below, I could hear the sounds of our grandchildren playing, their laughter rising like music into the evening air. It was not the life I had expected. It was not the life anyone expected, but it was ours, and it was beautiful beyond measure. The end of a story is never really the end. It is simply the place where the storyteller chooses to stop, leaving the rest to the imagination of those who listen. But if I were to stop here, in this moment of peace and gratitude, I would want you to know this. Love is not a transaction. It cannot be bought or bargained for, earned or demanded. It is a gift, freely given and freely received, and its power lies not in grand gestures, but in small ones. A hand reached out in comfort, a voice lifted in kindness, an offer to share what is most precious, even with a stranger. My daughter understood this before she could read, before she knew the weight of the world or the cruelty of society. She understood that love is meant to be given away, and in the giving, it multiplies. I have tried to live by her example. I have tried to love freely, to forgive easily, to offer hope wherever I find despair. I have not always succeeded. I have stumbled and failed and retreated behind walls of my own making. But I have always returned to her lesson, to the memory of a little girl on orphanage steps telling a weeping duke that he could borrow her mama. And in return, love has given me more than I ever dreamed of asking for. So this is my story, the story of Eleanor Ashford, who became Eleanor Blackwood, who learned that the greatest transformations come not from titles or wealth, but from the simple act of opening one's heart. The story of a man who thought he would never love again, and a child who showed him otherwise. The story of a family built from broken pieces, made whole by grace and stubbornness, and the quiet, persistent power of hope. It is not a perfect story. There were tears alongside the laughter, struggles alongside the triumphs, moments of doubt that threatened to overshadow the faith. But it is a true story, as true as any story can be that is filtered through memory and shaped by love. And it is, in the end, a happy story. Not because everything was easy, not because we never suffered or struggled or questioned our choices, but because we faced whatever came together, hand in hand, heart to heart, and because we never stopped believing that love was worth fighting for. So if you take nothing else from these pages, take this. Do not be afraid to love. Do not be afraid to offer kindness to those who seem beyond its reach. Do not be afraid to open your heart, even when every instinct tells you to protect it. Because you never know when a little girl might be watching, ready to teach you the most important lesson of all. Do not cry, sir. You can borrow my mama. And in the borrowing, you might just find a home. I set down my pen now, in the quiet of my chamber, with the sounds of my family drifting up from below. Alexander is calling for me, his voice still strong despite the years, still full of the warmth that captured my heart so long ago. The grandchildren are demanding a story, and Iris is laughing at something one of her brothers said, and the whole house seems to hum with life and love. I have been so blessed. More blessed than I ever deserved, more blessed than I ever dared to hope. And it all began with a duke who wept on orphanage steps, and a little girl who offered him everything she had. This is my story, and now it is yours.